Yeah, welcome to today's micro conference on capitalizing on smarter working in housing. I'm Liam Turner, the editor of Housing Digital. We'll move on to the first of today's three keynotes. So the first one is going to be delivered by Simon Adnett, who is the Vice President of Sales UK and Ireland at Enghouse Interactive. And he will be talking to us all about the transforming customer service through digital innovations. So over to you, Simon.
Yes, I work for Enghouse Interactive. So we specialize in customer experience and customer engagement solutions. So what I'm going to look at today is just how digital transformation can really change and drive customer experience and customer service, and also looking at some of the things that it helps to have in place to drive that digital strategy, because a lot of talk around sort of bots and AI and different things that you can do from a digital perspective. So I'm just going to have a look at some of the things it helps to have in place. I think one of the things that is going to drive this a lot is the sort of changes in regulations around what's required from a tenant satisfaction point of view, and how you capture that information, and what type of information you now need to capture from tenants, and how you need to report that back. And really looking at how that ties in with your overall digital engagement strategy, I think is going to be key to, one, effectively capturing that data, and two, making sure that it gives the best reflection of the service that your organization is giving. So from that perspective, around 2/3 of organizations have already begun their sort of digitization, if you like. And some of the key things to think about when you look at this are how many times tenants need to contact you for different things. What are the different ways that they can use for contacting you? Obviously, there's the more traditional ones, like they can pick up the phone. A lot of people go to websites these days as their first port of call to try and see what information is available online. But more and more people are accessing from different devices as well, whether that's tablets and mobile devices. So the expectation is that they are able to get access to information and contact you whilst on the move potentially, and not necessarily either sat in front of a computer or tethered to a landline. I think as well, understanding the different languages you need to support for tenants is another key thing, so that they can interact with you in a way that's comfortable for them, and make sure that they understand the information they're being given as well, and they can effectively communicate with you. Also understanding what their needs are as well, whether they have any specific needs or restrictions that are going to drive how they prefer to engage with you and contact you, and how they're going to understand the information, and how best to present that to them as well. And then also how they find that progress. So for example, if they have got a request in for a repair, how do they understand what the status of that repair is, any communication around appointments and that sort of thing as well. So one of the key things to look at really is understanding the different types of interactions you have with tenants, and the data that's held, and what systems contain that information. That's really key to understanding how you can better digitize those interactions, and also automate as much as possible, because that's how you can drive down cost and also improve the efficiency of those interactions. So I think if we have a look at the different types of interactions, key ones are people reporting issues, looking for updates and feedback on activities that are going on. So an example might be repairs there. And typically that will be in a housing management or incident management system. And that information will either be tenant or property specific. And then you have customer satisfaction surveys and associated data with that. again, as I mentioned at the beginning, something that's becoming kind of more and more relevant. And I guess there are two types of things there. There's more general surveys around satisfaction and understanding what tenants feel about the properties and the service they get, but also more dynamic surveys where you might be surveying about a specific repair or a specific interaction that somebody's had with your organization. And then you have more general things, which may be sort of just general inquiries or requests for information, or maybe complaints that are coming in and how you manage those. And typically we look at that kind of information going into a knowledge management system. So you've got a structured way of keeping that information, and that can help with staff training as well. So I think one of the key things that's changed over the last few years is really the different channels of communication that people expect to use. There's more traditional channels like phone and email and visiting the website. More and more people like to engage through chat, but also social media channels have become much more sort of like used like instant messaging or conversational. So things like WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook Messenger, and they're tending to replace the more typical things like contact us forms, I guess more traditional on websites in terms of, do you want to speak to us about something? What is it you're asking about? Whereas with something like WhatsApp, somebody can just start a conversation and launch into a request about a very specific thing without really necessarily an opportunity to kind of filter what that request is about. And then there's the classic face-to-face meetings, which of course are still important and take place as well. So there's a wide range of channels that people can use for communicating. And a lot of those are obviously digital channels. So for assisted service and self-service, it may be typical that tenants would go and try and find information on a website, or they may try contacting your contact center to try and find out information. And a lot of those requests might be handled by either information that you've put up on the website or an actual individual within the organization that's going to be answering and dealing with that request. And so taking that information that you publish out on the website and making it available both inside and outside the organization, but storing it in a structured way, is something that can be really useful with a digital strategy going forward. And I'll touch on how, but rather than just having that information as articles on a website, if you store that in a knowledge management system, it allows you to search and use that data in different ways across different channels. So typically where somebody might be just looking at an article on a website, that same information can be used for employees working in the contact center, for example, to answer queries, but it can be used in different ways as well. In terms of the customer satisfaction side of things, that can be coupled with automated notifications as well. So you can send out automated customer satisfaction surveys, and then depending on the information that comes back, that can be channeled to an individual to follow up and capture more detailed information, particularly if a survey score is poor or somebody's complaining about a specific thing. Then it makes sense to follow up with an individual and try and understand what the problem is, what the challenge is, how it can be resolved, and also how that situation can be avoided in the future. In terms of housing and property management systems, they tend to be key in managing reporting of issues and repair requests, but people will often contact as well looking for status updates or understanding what the status is of maybe a particular repair is. And one of the things we can do there is use these digital channels and integration into your housing management systems to help automate that. And it also means off the back of a particular inquiry or particular request, you can trigger an automated survey off the back of that to understand how you handled that request and what the tenant's experience was. The other thing is we can add in additional digital channels. So for example, rather than handling requests over the phone, through channels such as chat, you can then escalate to things like video. So if somebody is contacting you around a repair request, they can actually use the video on their mobile device to show what they're talking about and allow more information and more detailed information around what repair needs to be undertaken. Once that information is stored in different systems, then you can start using different technologies like bots and AI and more levels of automation to try and drive more efficiencies across each of these channels. So examples might be if somebody's contacting you for an update request on a request that they've put in, then using an automated channel and integrating into the repair system or the housing management system, you could provide an automated response to that individual rather than them necessarily having to speak to an individual about it. And in many cases, that can be automated, so you can be sending out proactive notifications as well. So the use of those bots across different channels can be extended to things like knowledge management as well. So if you have knowledge stored in a particular system, and they can be things like policies and procedures and general information, then people can use more conversational engagement across different digital channels, including social channels, to gather that information rather than necessarily having to go onto a website to get it. So I think some of the key things I would say to really improving automation is understand where the knowledge sits within your organization. So which systems contain which bits of information. Look at implementing systems that support integration. That's usually through application programming interfaces, often known as APIs. But when looking at implementing new technologies, look at systems that allow other things to hook into them and use the information that they store. Another key thing is to identify high volume, low complexity interactions, because one of the key things you can there is see where the biggest benefit from automation is going to come. Also try and understand the preferences of your tenants for communication. So this can be through the use of surveys, but I would note that there needs to be a certain degree of caution there, because the method you're using for surveying could also skew the preferences that people have. For example, if you're doing a survey over SMS, then people who have a propensity to respond and use SMS will probably prefer that method of communication, for example. But also look at what are the appropriate channels for automation. They typically tend to be things like chat channels, where you've naturally got a digital engagement with somebody. Also try and understand where language support is required, and this can be automated now through technologies such as real-time translation. So even if you have English-speaking people, it's possible to translate both ways a conversation so that both the tenant and the person handling the request can understand what the requirement is and deliver the necessary responses. And then I think once you've got that, you can really try and understand and evaluate what technology makes the most sense, whether it's just a simple search capability into a knowledge base or knowledge management, whether it's some sort of directed workflow where you're asking a series of questions and then directing somebody through to either the right individual or the right information, whether it's more conversational. These days, artificial intelligence can have a conversational understanding. So through a more sort of chatty and informal method, it can understand the question somebody's trying to ask and the associated information that then will match the response. And then beyond that, there are things like generative AI, where actually, if you've got a knowledge management system within your organization, then the AI can look across that as long as there's interfaces for getting into that information, and it can start building tailored responses that fit the specific requests of the individual. So these are some techniques you can use to really look at how through digitization you can try and automate a lot more of your interactions. And that can do two things, really. It can improve the responsiveness of your organization, but it can also reduce the cost base of serving your tenants as well. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that, Simon. Yeah, very interesting insights there, especially around AI, which, as we know, is a very kind of hot topic at the minute. Do we have any questions for Simon? And if you do, you can ask in the chat as well, if you like. I'll get the questions going then. So yeah, staying on AI. Are there any risks housing providers should be particularly aware of when it comes to implementing AI within their customer service systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key one was one of the things I touched on there, really, which is, I think, to get the biggest benefit out of the technology, such as AI, then you really do need to have structure around the information that you have within your organization. And sometimes that can be limited by existing systems that you're running. So I think, before necessarily embarking on a journey down that route where you're trying to automate things within the organization, which is ultimately what AI is trying to do. It's trying to understand the request and a piece of information and match those two things together. I think one of the key things is to really understand where different pieces of information exist within the organization and try and get them into a digital form that a technology like AI can then consume. And I think one of the benefits you then have once you've got that in place is, as you supplement the information and grow that within your organization, the AI will automatically be able to take advantage of that. But if you don't really have that structure in place to support that behind the scenes, then you're going to be spending a lot of time constantly trying to coach and tailor the AI engine.
Yeah.
And the more manual intervention you have to have there, then obviously that kind of increases your cost base for managing it. And it also limits the scope of what the technology can do. And I think also AI is a very broad technology.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, it can cover simple things like understanding the requests somebody has, interpreting those, and then following quite a set workflow. And that can still have a benefit to it, because it means you're not necessarily having to structure too much what people are asking you, but you can structure the way you want to direct them to the information, versus full-blown sort of conversational or generative AI, where you're having a proper back and forth conversation and it's trying to mine information. I think, again, with generative AI, you have to be quite careful, because it's going to be looking across a source of data and trying to generate an answer based on that information. And there's always a danger with a technology like that, is that it generates a response from a number of sources of information that isn't necessarily truthful in its full sense, although can seem very plausible.
Sure. Yeah. I believe we've got a question from Paul Lowe.
Hi. Yeah, I suppose it's an observation and a question. I suppose we know that a number of our customers are digitally excluded for either due to financial reasons, or there's an active choice not to use it. And we know that from the surveys and the research that we've done. So I'd be interested in, if there's any kind of, if Simon had any thoughts on overcoming, barriers to digital inclusion. The second thing I would be interested in is, and it's something in the breakout room earlier Lou mentioned, which was absolutely right, around systems aren't always the silver bullet. You need a whole ecosystem around managing processes effectively, making sure that ecosystem to support the technology is in place. And I suppose leading on from that, I suppose, has Simon got any experience of supporting organizations to understand how to effectively calculate their return on investment, and also ensure that they are able to create these effective ecosystems that support the effective use of that technology? Because in my experience, people say, will say to you, oh, digital by design is cheaper. The vast majority of the time I'm finding it's twice as expensive because you're getting it wrong and then you're generating multiple contacts, or there's a lot of failures associated with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think coming back to the sort of first part of the question around, those that are digitally excluded, I think an important thing to bear in mind there is that there are going to be some people that, for one reason or another, it's just not possible for them to engage over some of these new channels that we're looking at implementing. But I think what's key to understand is that, again, not necessarily looking at the digital engagement side of things, but the systems that sit behind that. Things like, for example, a knowledge management solution allows an individual within your organization that might be dealing with that tenant that is digitally excluded to get easy access to the information they need to support them as well. So I think when thinking about a sort of a digital journey, it's not necessarily always about the outward facing side of things, but actually how that structure can support people within your own organization to engage with tenants as well. Because if somebody, for example, on a phone call has easy access to information, or even articles are getting presented to them whilst they're having the conversation, then that can help them more effectively support the tenant without the tenant necessarily being the one that's got direct digital engagement with the organization. I think you're right about the systems side of things. It is a challenge, and that's why I sort of say to organizations, before kind of looking necessarily at the digital engagement tools themselves, you need to look at where you're storing information within the organization and understand what systems they're in and what the different ways of hooking into those systems are. But you're absolutely right, Paul. I mean, the other part of it is what processes within your organization utilize those systems. So I think sometimes it's a case of going back to fundamentals and looking at, for different types of requests or different types of activities within my organization, I need to capture in a flow, what the different processes and what the different system touch points of part of that process are involved, because you're never going to be able to fully digitize that journey unless you've understood what systems and touch points form part of that journey and whether they can be automated. Because it doesn't really matter what you do further up the chain if there's a fundamental part of it, further down the process that for whatever reason you're unable to automate, that whole sort of benefit of automation gets lost at that point. And that's also where you start to get inconsistencies. The record keeping can break down as well. So yeah, I mean, I think sort of almost in the question you sort of highlighted the answer in terms of some of the things that are important to do is actually take a step back and map out the processes within the organization to try and understand what the touch points are. That can also be an opportunity to just improve the processes themselves as well, regardless of the digitization side of things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Next question. We've got, I think, Guy Corbett from Live Housing.
Hi. It wasn't necessarily a question. I just wanted to kind of agree with the points that Paul made, and then the follow up from Simon in the sense of that whole ecosystem piece. And I think interestingly, we've just started a piece of work around knowledge management, and the whole piece is around actually joining up that bit from policy all the way through to process, procedure, training information, because one of the things that we find is stuff gets changed somewhere in the middle of that whole process, and then all the training information is completely out of date, to then actually what's then going to appear in some form of knowledge management system. And I think the investment that we're prepared to spend, I think, as a business going forward is now going to be on that front end part of it. And I think the system itself it could be something that Enghouse provided or somebody else. I think that bit is not incidental, because that minimizes the impact of the system itself, but I think it gives you that choice of what system are you going to use, how are you going to deploy it, etc., etc. But if you don't get that first bit right, and that's where the investment lies, because it's time, isn't it? There's a lot of time. You know, I think we're gonna go down a proof of concept on one relatively big process and take it from policy all the way through, see how that works, and then say, okay, how would we systemize that and use the knowledge management system to do that?
Yeah, no, it's a great book, because I think a lot of focus is put around the actual engagement technology itself, where, I mean, it's dangerous for me to say it's incidental, given that's what my organisation, part of what my organisational does, as well as things like knowledge management and quality management. But yeah, I mean, the systems that are in place to support that, if you get those bits right, then it gives you more choice about how you manage that sort of final touch point with the end, the end tenant or customer. And certainly the process part of that is key, which is the bit that isn't digital from that point of view, but it's sort of understanding how your own organization operates again a little bit, which in itself can sometimes be revealing. I think the other important thing is the feedback loop there as well, and part of that is customer surveys and understanding feedback from tenants, but also the use of quality management as well. So internally you can look at how you're servicing tenants, and the level of service you're giving can be really insightful, because through the use of that, it gives you another view of how people are using the systems that you have internally, and whether they're effectively using them, and whether they're aware of everything that's available to them, which can then, as you say, it kind of leads back into the training side of things and more that human element as well. So yeah, I think it's very much a symbiotic relationship from that point of view, between what the organization does structurally and from a process point of view, and the underlying technology that's there to support that.
Yeah, I'm getting the impression this is perhaps something we could talk about for quite a while, but unfortunately we're going to have to draw the questions to a close there. So thanks again, Simon, for speaking today. Yeah. So yeah, once again, thanks all for joining today. And as I said, hope to see you on the next one in a few months' time.